How's it going, everybody? Today we're gonna do a reaction video of this new Christian YouTube channel called Redeemer Sumer. I did previous two reaction videos, one from a traditional Catholic, I think I forgot his name, it's like Catholic C or something like that. Another one from a Christian Orthodox. They did iceberg videos and stuff like that, and I react to it. Now we're gonna talk about Reform Bad. Shit, I forgot. Not Baptist, but Reformed Protestant, right? It's titled "The Only," all capital letters, "Hope for Young Men." Let's see how they talk about, right? Because I saw many videos trying to explain these types of titles, and they go to a direction that like no basis in reality for the most part. So let's see what he has to do because he's a zoomer. I'm a zoomer. We're the youngest generation. Well, technically, Alpha, the oldest person of the Alpha generation, is 14 right now. So, yeah. So there you go.
Young men are not doing well in the modern world. Young men have the highest rates of homelessness, suicide, and they're often very lonely. And people put forward a lot of explanations as to why.
I'm going to verify this after the video to see whether or not that's true. The young man, because that sounds very vague. If the like just young man in general, or you trying to be if the you know what if the let's see if the yes, young men, if they are the most homeless, if they are, see, according to the government, if the Australian Bureau of Statistics, so this is Australian government survey, 20.8% between the age of 25 to 34. So, young men, yes. Uh, so yeah, there's that.
Why this might be. But I think it all boils down to most men not having hope for their futures. For most.
Okay, I can agree with this. The problem I will have if the would be where he's leading up to. You know. Oh, I Google again from another survey in the U.S. They found that the American Homeless Service Manager Alec Rose revealed the average age of a homeless person in America was 11 children.
Most of history, if you were a man, you could reasonably hope to get a decent job, find a wife, and start a family. But the structure of modern society makes it really hard for the average man to do these things.
But why? Are you gonna talk about the actual reason? Neoliberalism, hierarchy, the state, oligarchy, plutocracy, imperialism, colonialism. We gotta talk about all that, or you gotta blame women.
We could talk about how bad the economy is in general in terms of like wages and stuff, and that's valid.
That's been the case for centuries. You know, the increase of economic inequality has been going on for over a century now. And in fact, we could talk about American economic inequality all day, which is really, really bad, by the way. It's horrible. Yet somehow, despite how horrible it is, compared to other countries, it is one of the most economically equal countries in the world. If we know how bad American is, so if America is considered one of the best, imagine other countries that are considered the worst by neoliberal standards. Which, for example, South Africa is considered one of the worst examples of economic equality. So, yeah.
But it's especially hard for men because in many ways school is rigged against boys. The public education system.
It's not rigged against boys. Remember, we live in a society which is patriarchal in nature. Men are always in power. You have to rephrase this. It's not rigged against boys. It's rigged against non-rich people, non-upper class people, which comprise only 20% of the world's population, and only 25% of the U.S. population are considered upper class. And when I mean upper class, by pure economic perspective, you need the bare minimum, the absolute bare minimum, earn around $75,000 a year to be considered upper class. That is the bare minimum. and only 25% of the U.S. population earns that amount, regardless how they earn it, and only 20% of the world population earns something around that. So if you don't have a single family member who owns $75,000 a year, it doesn't matter either from employment or from a retirement pension or whatever's the case, you're not upper class.
System.
Oh, the education system is a system of control. It was modeled after Prussia as a way to educate slaves. It's made to establish a hierarchy of the myth of meritocracy. I will put descriptions about this.
Often favors feminine traits like being neat, organized, quiet, and following directions.
Like I said, it was school as we know it was modeled after the Prussian system of education, which is basically educate slaves to be obedient slave labor. Like that time, many parents refused to take them to school because they know it's basically to teach them be obedient slave. They had to bring the military to take their children away from them. This is capitalism at its finest. This is nothing about feminine or masculine traits because those concepts change over time, change constantly. What is considered masculine back then will be considered feminine now. For example, men used to wear skirts, men used to wear makeup, men used to wear wigs. Example, panties, which was first invented in Egypt, originally worn by men. In Rome and Greece, concept of gay or straight wasn't a thing back then. Back those days in the Roman Republic, to discriminate you over sexuality wasn't not you like guys or girls, it was whether or not you were a top or a bottom.
And it often punishes more masculine traits like being loud, energetic, and creative.
That's vague. Both sex can have those traits. That's not considered a masculine trait. And even if it did, it only punished the woman who did that because there are studies in the workforce when a woman's more assertive, energetic, loud, they want to get a raise, like that attitude, they are less likely to get a raise, they're less likely to get promotion, they're more likely to be fired, and they're being labeled as quote unquote a bitch. But when a man does it, it gets the opposite treatment.
So men start off at a disadvantage, but even if they do manage to get a good job, then there's the problem of not being able to find a wife. Because
Marriage is a social question. Marriage originally was a form of owning property, owning slaves in the Proto-Indo-European practice. We can see that even in the language. You say the father's daughter or the brother's sister or something like that, but there's no female equivalent to that because marriage was originally a form of exchange of property. I give you this, you give me your daughter. That was how it was originally. It didn't become about love or anything like that. It was way after, centuries, millennia after marriage was established, where they removed the original slave-like mentality to a more lovely, romantic view of it. But even then, it has its problems about the patriarchal nature where the man owns the woman to an extent, or they treat her as inferior because the man is in charge of the house or in charge of the relationship. We see that in many cultures. Confucius is one extreme example.
Traditional family structure has been replaced with hookup culture. So
again, another misconception video, I don't know. According to the book Moral Brains, they show a found survey about traditional indigenous cultures around the world and tradition about relationship, romance, and stuff like that throughout human history and throughout the world globally. Only 11% of all cultures in the world, only 11% of all culture strictly practice monogamy. The overwhelming majority of cultures practice form a non-monogamous relationships. It could be polyamorous, it could be a harem or a reverse harem. There's a term for that, but I don't remember what it is. It could be stay single, like a hookup, you said. In many forms of sexuality, many indigenous culture had third, fourth, or even fifth genders. There are many things like that. This hetero monogamous hegemony it's a later creation, and even then, within indigenous culture, it's a very, very small minority. Free love is natural. To discriminate people who are not in that very specific relationship it doesn't make sense in nature. You don't see animals discriminate other animals from being gay or hooking up with another animal or anything like that. Hell, even most animals don't practice monogamy.
Monogamy has been replaced with a sort of polygamy in hookup culture almost. We're almost reverting to prehistoric times.
Again, there are many different types of religion. It's very more complex than just polygamy hookup. What about free love? What about people who are aromantic and asexual, who are also in relationship? They do exist. What about people who only go into relationship purely for financial means, like many political marriages or arranged marriages? That's still practiced in many cultures. You have to understand the nuance of culture to understand what's going on. It's not as simple as like straight monogamy versus whatever you don't like.
Times where a few alpha males get all the women.
There's no such thing as an alpha male. That's a myth. It was originally about studies of wolves, and even the person who came up with the term has said that's bullshit.
Have all the hookups, leaving.
Again, look at the San people, the Hatsan, the Sandawe, the Mipuni, the Amasin people, the Pueblo people. They are the oldest indigenous groups in the world. In the first five or six diameter are from Africa. The Pueblo is the oldest group in the Americas. The Sami is the oldest in Europe. The Aboriginal Australia is the oldest in Oceania. They don't have this concept what you are describing. It's more complex than that.
The majority of other men kind of sexually frustrated. And historically speaking, it's really dangerous when you have a large population of sexually frustrated and unemployed men who don't really have any purpose or direction in life.
Unemployment is more of an important factor than sexual frustration, because throughout history we have prostitutes, which is often considered colloquially as the oldest profession in the world. I will argue is hunter-gathering is considered a job. You're hunting to find food, and agriculture, I consider that's older, but that's just me. But and even then, work, employment is bullshit. Again, another system of control. We should abolish work and employment. The idea of wage salary to maintain you, if we don't pay you starve. That's a form of slavery. That's a form of violence. Wage slavery is a thing. That's why most forms of slavery nowadays, they use that wage or something similar to that nature as a means of threat. If you don't work for me or you don't do that, you don't get paid. If you don't get paid, you can't afford food. If you can't afford food, you're going to starve. If you can't afford to pay the house, the electricity, you gotta be homeless. It's a form of violence. It's a form of complicated, multi-step progress. It's not something you can simply say, oh, I just quit and get another. If it was that easy.
That could lead to a big social crisis, and I know none of us want that. So this needs to change soon. And part of it is also the decline of religion has caused the decline of traditional family structure.
Again, tradition by who and where. Again, it's more complex than you're implying. Multiple cultures don't have the thing that you consider traditional, even though their tradition, 9 times out of 10, is ordering in your tradition. Again, look at the many indigenous communities in Africa and in the Americas specifically. And the kind of religion doesn't mean anything. We gotta look at an example. I gotta put link in the description. The least religious countries in the world, and when I mean religious, I'm not talking about automatically atheists, because you could be anti-religious and atheist. That's the thing. The least religious countries are the most prosperous and happiest countries in the world in sociological studies. So there's that.
And traditional communities. It used to be that the church was the lifeblood of everyone's community.
Again, the church, but if we talk about the Christian church, it's been around only from the 2nd century onwards. So are we going to ignore the other thousands of years of history where the church at least from a Christian understanding of it, did not exist. And even then, pre-Mesopotamia, you know, there were cities as far 5,000 years predating Sumeria. You know, they didn't have that. What about indigenous community? They are atheists. They have no concept of God in their culture. You know, like the Pajara people in the South America. You know, there are various indigenous people. There are atheists or agnostic or some form of Epicurean deists, and they're living just fine.
Like the mainline church, whether Protestant or Catholic, in the center of any given town was the community center, and it used to be really rare for.
Yeah, we're going to ignore the very Protestant movement that basically were anti-church, especially anti-church authority, like the Anabaptists, or the Hutzites, or the Taborites, or the various mystics, Christian mystics throughout history.
For someone to not have community because everyone went to church and everyone's community was centered around the church. But now that religion,
Unless you have access to it, because there are many parts in medieval Europe where many poor villages live very far away from church, so they couldn't go physically to church. That's why many missionaries go to these villages, because for them that was the only access. You know, they didn't have cars back then. They couldn't just simply go to the local church. Some villages, past the village, live so far away they couldn't. So they had to wait some random preacher walk in, give him a survey, stay there for a while, and leaves, and wait for the same preacher or a different one to do the same.
has declined. It's become a lot more common for people to have no friends. Like, just ask any old person. It used to be a complete anomaly for someone to have no friends. That used to be like a weird thing. But now it's really
Again, depending the location, culture, background, etc. There were lonely people back then. And remember, culture had a different view of friendship sometimes. Some people had a very high priority, while others were very hyper individualistic. You know, you have to understand this is more complicated than just simply, you know, this good, this bad.
common for people, especially men, to have no friends. Or if they have friends, it's like not any sort of intimate long-term connection. Like a lot of people have their friend groups on like Discord. A lot of men who are gamers and stuff, but those things don't last. We know those don't last. So
How do you know? There are many people who had online friendship that lasted for decades. Do you ever saw? Well, you're a zoomer. I'm a zoomer, but like, do you ever saw the early internet forum communities out there established? Some people became friends in these early internet forums 20 years ago, by the way, and they're still friends now. Some people even got married thanks to Discord or stuff like that. So it's like,
there are three ways in which society prevents men from revolting against the way things are. Three ways in which society, the powers that be, prevent men from challenging the status quo. I call it MVP. And that's
wait, go back. Okay.
revolting against the way things are. Three ways in which society, the powers that be, prevent men from challenging the status quo. I call it MVP.
The fuck is this? Marijuana? Bro, did you ever heard of the hippie movement, the 60s? Many of them used marijuana, acid, and psychedelic drugs, and many of them started revolts, protests, and even downright revolutions. That doesn't make sense whatsoever. Second about video games. Do you ever see any former activists related to video games? Do you see how many video games were created, especially indie games, critiquing the society we're living? Hell, Tetris. The person who made Tetris the video game was struggling against the USSR, who prevented for the game to be spread worldwide. He had to fight the system. And pornography, bro, do you forget porn has been around for thousands of years? And I'm not talking about prostitutes. I'm talking about like erotic drawings and stuff like that. It's been around as long as society has been around. This is nothing new. Yeah. Is this gonna be a conservative, like, you know, stuff? 'Cause especially the marijuana doesn't even make sense. Are we going to ignore the 60s and 70s altogether? And what about video games? There are many video games that critique society, especially like, in a very creative way, like Disco Elysium, Remember Me, the first Bioshock, is the Talos principle. Although that's more of a philosophy, yeah, philosophy and stuff. But like, get my point. There are many games that did that. How many games talk about? Oh, what about games made in China critiquing Mao Zedong that got cancelled? That's a form of activism. Or what about the Minecraft server that has a server of a library of forbidden books where certain literature that are illegal in certain country can pretty much publish in Minecraft? Like, that's amazing. That's a form of activism. That's a form of communication and exchange of ideas.
P. And that stands for marijuana, video games, and pornography. So marijuana is the classic staple drug of Generation Z. It has basically replaced...
Okay, I'm a broken record, but the 60s, the 70s, you forgot about this? That's nothing new. Hell, not even video games. Many people of Gen X had them.
Tobacco is the most common substance people use. And what marijuana...
You say that like it's a bad thing because marijuana, unlike tobacco, doesn't give you cancer. That's actually a better alternative. There's a reason why marijuana is being legalized and decriminalized in many parts of the world, because one, it's a less dangerous version of alternative to tobacco, and there is medical treatment that benefits people. So, I don't consume drugs. I'm a straight edge, but I also believe in drug liberation.
is famous for is making people passive. People who are stoned have no motivation to do anything. One of my relatives is a psychologist who deals with a lot of people who are addicted to marijuana, and those people have no motivation. Even if they're not like addicted per se, it still affects them in that it destroys their motivation. So I think one of the reasons that society is promoting marijuana as opposed to tobacco is because marijuana really does make men passive. It makes men not care about anything. And the nihilism that marijuana causes really does fit with the spirit of Gen Z, the sort of nihilistic, nothing matters, apathetic spirit. But
What? Do you forgot the tobacco industry, who they know there are constantly cancer, spend billions of dollars of lying people that it doesn't give you chronic diseases, even though it does. Marijuana was many people promote as not only a better alternative, as a form of revolution, as a form of protest against the hippie movement. And the nihilism part that represent Gen Z, that only makes sense, and we talk about a specific demographic of Gen Z, because I can show you a demographic where Gen Z represent this absurdist, Dadaist creative of the innovation of Gen Z. What about we are the first digital natives, some people call it. We embrace futuristic ideas and technology and stuff. In fact, some even argue we are more optimistic than previous generation, or at least for the first time since the Great Generation.
Really does match the vibe of Gen Z, and in some ways, I think it's like a coping mechanism for the reality that many people in Gen Z have no purpose in their lives. So,
or maybe because our socioeconomic system prevent people to live a good life, because in order to be successful, and when I mean successful, just live an economically comfortable life, you have to be born on wealth. There's multi-generational wealth. If you were born for somebody from an upper class status, you're guaranteed gonna have a decent life. It doesn't matter you're in the bottom half, barely holding on to the upper class status. You're automatically better off than 90% of the population. So yeah, and also race plays a role, because in the United States, if you're white, you're more likely to have opportunity than somebody who's not white. If you're a man, you have more likely to have opportunity. If you're not a man, if you're straight, you have more opportunities. If you're not straight, etc. Oh, if you're Christian, you have more opportunities. If you're not a Christian,
smoking weed just kind of helps them forget about it all. But if we're to be good Christian men, we can't simply sit back and be apathetic and just complain about the way things are. We need to do something. So we need to stand up against marijuana usage. That's a big thing.
Bro, you're doing reversing the progress that people did for the past 60, 70 years. You're going backwards.
The second thing is video games. And it's kind of weird that I'm telling you this while I'm playing a video game. So video games in general are not bad per se. It's video game addiction that is bad. Video games are good in moderation. I close the server on Sundays so people can go to church. Video game.
Okay, that's just a crucial way of doing it, but still, addiction in general is bad. What is considered addiction? The simple explanation for people who don't know is basically you're addicted to something. It can be literally anything whatsoever that prevents your daily life. For example, it negatively affect your social life or your work life. You know, for example, I can play video games all day, every day, but if I still have the ability to communicate with other people just fine, go to work just fine, you know, then I'm not addicted. It only becomes addicted if I can't go to work, I'm incapable of going back to work, I'm capable to communicate with people, etc. That's where it becomes addicted because I'm negatively affecting my social and work life.
Game addiction is a real problem among a lot of men, and the media doesn't talk about it as much as it should, because men completely waste their lives and play video games instead of socializing or getting a job and stuff. But in many ways, like I said, it's a vicious cycle because it is hard for a lot of men to achieve anything, and video games are kind of a distraction from that reality, so I get it.
There are many forms to extract reality: movies, reading books, writing books, sports, and other forms. Literally anything can be considered, in a very abstract way, a distraction from reality. Hell, religion can fit in this category as well, where you don't want to understand the real world or you don't want to face the problem, so you go to your church or your religion to not see that. It can happen. This video game is not unique. Anything on paper can do this. It's just you, either on purpose or by pure accident, had to be in that territory to do it.
But then it just makes things worse. It's a vicious cycle. Part of the reason why video games sort of pacify men and prevent them from challenging the status quo is because video games can be a form of escapism.
Do you see the video game community? There are a bunch of sexist, homophobic, transphobic, fatphobic, anti-feminist assholes for the most part. They don't want to change the status quo, they want to keep the status quo. They want to maintain the things they are. And anybody in the video game community who want to go to a different direction, they verbally are against it. Look at the new Aztec game, where the main focus is about the Aztecs. And then you have these racist people who want to play conquistador to fight the savage. That is a colonialist mentality. And as an indigenous person myself from the Caribbean, this is bullshit. Imagine you may a video game, a Christian game, and people get mad because you cannot play as a demon or Satanist. Now you have to respond to these idiots. Now you have to put Satan as a playable character to kill Jesus. You know how stupid that is?
Video games satisfy men's desire for adventure, so they don't seek adventure in the real world. That's why
what about games that aren't not about the adventure, like farming simulator, truck simulator? That's a thing, because adventure. What do you mean by that? Again, it is more complicated what you are currently implying in this statement right now. What about video games? They don't focus on adventure, focus on storytelling. Like Talos Principle is a philosophical video game about reality, God, and faith. Or from an atheist perspective, what about the first Bioshock game, which is a critique of Ayn Rand's objectivism and right-wing libertarianism? Or any daily simulator where the focus is about romance. So
video games can be fun, can be a fun form of socializing, but they shouldn't be a substitute for the real world. Like on this Minecraft server, we all build churches in Minecraft, but I'm always very clear that this is not a substitute for going to church in real life, and I always encourage people, if you're...
How do you know? You say that because we currently live in an era where technology that we are having are in its early stages, in its infancy. For all we know, in the future, it may replace it. in a digital, we're gonna be digital churches. I highly recommend the book by the philosopher David Chower, Reality Plus Virtual Worlds and the Problems of Philosophy.
Building a church on this server, you need to go to church in real life, because I don't want Minecraft to replace real life. But for many young men, video games do replace real life. All men have a desire for adventure. The story Lord of the Rings really exemplifies this, where even people...
What happens if you're a Christian in a non-Christian country, like a Muslim majority country or a Buddhist majority country or a Hindu majority country, where there are not many Christians? You want to interact with our culture, but where you live, you cannot do that. Or in some cases, you get discriminated by it. So online is the only place where you generally can contact with like-minded individuals like yourself. Again, you have to understand the context. It's more complicated than that. There are some people that they don't want to do what you're saying that is a bad thing, but in some circumstances, they had no choice. They're benefiting from the few things they do have. So you have to let them enjoy. It's not easy. Homosexuality is still legal in certain country. So for them to communicate with other homosexuals, it's gotta be the internet to share their experience, share their lives, share their story, feel connected, feel part of community. Even though it's digital, they under their circumstances, they're having a good experience, despite in a situation where otherwise would be a sad and depressing life, because they cannot be who they are.
addicted to a comfortable lifestyle, like most men in Gen Z, have this innate desire for adventure.
What do you mean most people live in country? Bro, no person in Gen Z who works on minimum salary can rent a 1% apartment. Like, seriously, many people, millions and millions of people, are struggling from paycheck to paycheck. They are the working poor. They have a job, they work, yet they're still poor. Because every price, it's been raising. Everything raised their price, with the exception of salaries. Hell, in Borinquen, Puerto Rico, if you're under the age of 25, there's a law that you are paid half the minimum wage, so $4.25 an hour. After you turn 25, you get the minimum wage of $7.25, which again, you can't even rent a one person apartment for yourself with that salary nowhere in the United States. There's a reason why many people are advocating to raise the minimum salary from $7.28, which was the original, to $24 an hour, because that is the minimum requirement to live. To live, motherfucker. And that's for a single person. Imagine someone who's married with kids and pets. That is extremely difficult.
It's a good masculine trait to crave adventure, no matter what the public schools tell you.
What about women who crave for adventure? Is that a bad thing? Are they incapable of that? What about the many societies that have warrior women or something equivalent to that? Or encourage women to be adventurous or do something similar to the man like the Romans did? Yeah. Or what about matriarchal society where the woman's in charge, like the Taino people in the Caribbean?
The public schools completely dissuade all forms of adventurousness, and when I was in public school...
Even though the cacique, which is basically the leader, like the king pretty much, there were only 2 female cacique, but in order to be a cacique, it had to be from the mother side of the family, the mother bloodline. So they decide in the end of the day who's gonna be the leader.
So they told us whenever it snowed not to touch the snow. Like, not even not to fight with the snow. We couldn't touch the snow. No one ever explained why that was, but men are basically taught to be feminine from a young age and taught to hate their masculinity.
Again, the term family market, they're social constructs. Again, what is considered feminine now was considered masculine back then, and what was considered masculine back then was considered feminine now. You have to be understanding that culture change all the fucking time. And even then, what is considered masculine in your country may be considered feminine in other countries, in different cultures right now.
And I'm not into self-love or anything either. Self-love is anti-Christian. I have a video on that. But men still need to embrace their God-given masculinity.
Self-love is anti-Christian? What? You ever heard positive psychology? Many doctors promote that. you know there's a difference between positive psychology and like toxic positivity, which is forcing yourself to be positive though you shouldn't. But still, self-love is anti-Christian. What the fuck is that mean?
Masculinity. There's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, but if men are told that
God-given masculinity. You ever read any Jewish text where they describe God as non-binary? There's a meme about that, where the rainbow represents God is non-binary. I think it was a Kabbalah text in the 14th century, but still, there's that. Or if we talk about masculine, remember the goal of Paul and other early Christians, that they believe we should be angels, and according to them, angels are genderless asexual beings. That's pretty LGBT to me. So
masculinity is toxic, that really does not help. And a lot of men, especially those like me who went to public school, are taught that. But the healthy way to live out masculinity is to have productive adventures in the real world, not simply wasting our adventure on video games. And the third way that men are kept passive.
Again, you have to understand it's more complicated. Maybe in your case, but what about places where you can't go outside to adventure because you live in an extremely poverty country and you can't really afford to go outside without being endangered in any real way? It's not the same living in somewhere in Midwest US versus one example is Jamaica, for example, which is the murder capital of the world right now. Yeah, it's not the same.
Is pornography. A lot of times men want adventure so that either consciously or subconsciously they can impress women and find a mate.
What about men who are gay or bi or trans or non-binary or asexual or pansexual or intersex, like the Hueva Noche in Dominican Republic, which is a third gender native in Dominican Republic, where there are girls who develop male genitalia at the age of 12.
It's just how we evolved to think. But in the modern world, pornography has replaced love in many cases, and many men cannot.
Who the hell said they replaced love? Who? There are still people in relationships. There are people who had relationships, lived together, had kids, and died, and never officially got married. That's a thing. What about people who don't want to get married for many reasons? For example, some people don't believe in marriages for a variety of reasons. Some people believe in marriage because they believe you have to be married, and some people get miserable because they expected to do something even though they themselves don't really want to, but they're expected to. What about polygamy? What about asexuals? And what about other people who fit outside of whatever you consider as relationships?
Find a partner, so they turn to pornography to sort of numb the pain.
Ever heard of prostitutes? Maybe where you live is illegal, but that's common. And some people are again going to prostitute because they don't want to be in a serious relationship, and that's okay. Not everybody has to be married with kids. Some people don't want that, or some people want that but they're incapable of it for a variety of reasons. Maybe they're poor and homeless, so nobody's going to voluntarily marry a family with a homeless person, even though that homeless person really likes the idea to be a dad or a husband or a wife or a mother. Or what about places where they want to marry, they want to have kids, but they're infertile, but they don't want adoption? They want biological children, but they're physically incapable of having them.
Pain, but that only makes it even harder for them to find someone. That even makes it even harder to have relationships. And pornography doesn't just affect men, because the pornification of society affects women as well. A greater number of women are.
Yeah, because women are exploited. Unlike men, women in the pornography business are exploited. Many of them are subject to rape and being abused. And there are many cases when a prostitute get attacked or abused, the police doesn't give a shit because you're a whore. Why would she care? You're supposed to get fucked. Because for them, sex and rape, there is no difference for them when it comes to prostitutes or porn stars. Like they expect them to give their body to anybody, even if they're not consenting to it. There is a lot of sexist and misogynistic attitude toward women in the sex work business. Many women go to sex work not because they want to. They are forced to for financial reasons or economic reason. Some people sell their children to sex work because they are so poor they can't even. They have to sell children to prostitution to survive. What about in universities? There's a study found in university, 2 million university students prostitute themselves. You know why? Because they can't afford the student debt to pay out their student debt, so many of them resort to prostitution because they had no other choice. They are forced to. This is a form of violence, but it's not noticeable as other forms of violence, like I'm going to stab you, for example.
Becoming promiscuous and starting things like an OnlyFans. And men watching porn, men being addicted to porn, pressures women to act like women in porn act, which is completely unnatural and really unhealthy and dangerous for women, but it's what women are pressured into. So porn hurts men and women. In this video, I'm talking about men. And we could shame all day. We could shame the women who start OnlyFans pages, but who is it that is...
Again, you have to understand, there are going to women. Some, and I repeat, some women go to make OnlyFans account even though they have no good reason to do so, but there are many who do it because they are forced to for economic reasons. Hell, there are some teachers who barely get paid for their job and they had to resort to OnlyFans in order to pay the bills. That has happened. The reason you gotta see a teacher not because she's a whore, is because she's in a financial institution in her material conditions has forced her in a situation where even though she doesn't want to, she has to in order to survive. The same thing goes to men. Many white women who do OnlyFans are very privileged because for some reason, not just sexism and misogyny, but racism, non-white people who do OnlyFans get more discriminated.
Applying the demand for these OnlyFans pages. I'll give you a hint. It's not women, and I don't believe there's more than 2 genders. It's mostly men that are creating the demand, and I don't believe there's more than 2 genders. It's mostly men that are creating the demand for this porn culture, so we can't blame the ladies for it.
It's called capitalism, supply and demand, and they are forced into exploitation because a basic one-on-one understanding of it, the boss wants you to work as much as possible, as little pay as possible, while the employee wants to pay as much as possible with the little work as possible. There is a conflict.
Now, like I said, this is also kind of a vicious cycle. Men can't find a mate, so they turn to pornography.
Can't find a mate? What the fuck? You think we're fucking the fucking sheep or pigs or something? Like we need a mate, bro. It's more complicated than that. Again, we're going to ignore entire demographic of people who have no desire for sex whatsoever.
But that sort of makes women more promiscuous, and then the cycle repeats, and then it makes even fewer men find good, healthy relationships. So if men are to take a stand against the status quo, first we need to fix ourselves. Not be addicted to porn, not smoke weed, and not be addicted to video.
That's not how to change the status quo, fix the status quo. To change the fix is to change the system from its roots. Abolish the state. Abolish hierarchy, abolish all forms of centralized authority, abolish capitalism, abolish money, abolish the military-industrial complex, abolish the prince-industrial complex, abolish the police, abolish prison, abolish the standardized military, abolish money, abolish the market, abolish intellectual property, abolish copyright, abolish trademark, abolish other similar forms of copyrights. You know, there are many things that has to be abolished because right now it's destroying the planet. Scientists are warning about this for over a century, and the people in power, which are, let's be honest, rich people. There's no conspiracy in it. It's just people with money. Don't give a shit. They prefer to save 25 cents, even if it costs the destruction of the planet. Don't you forget that the Bible said money is the root of all evil?
Games. That is the big thing. But what can we do about it? Now, I'm not the first person to realize that there is a masculinity crisis. The most famous person who probably comes to mind is Jordan Peterson. He talks about this.
Oh, of course, it's Jordan Peterson. He's a hack. No wonder you went to these weird direction. Jordan Peterson not taken seriously even by his own profession.
It's all the time. He's a psychologist and has become like a celebrity who talks about young men's
for the wrong reasons.
problems that people have often ignored. He's really filling a void that the psychologists and
he's literally the guy who's like, to fix your problem, clean your room. Okay, now what? I'm still poor. I'm still discriminated because of my racial background or ethnicity or my language. I'm still discriminated because my sexual preference is slightly different than yours. I'm still me personally. Okay, I clean my room. Now what? I'm still discriminated because of my background. I'm still a second-class citizen. My homeland is still a colony oppressed by imperialism and colonialism, destroying my culture, doing cultural genocide. It still doesn't change the fact that the island I live owns over $80 billion of debt to the United States based on racist insular laws established in the early 1900s. It doesn't change the fact that I'm still a second-class citizen who can vote, doesn't have the same human rights as the rest of the United States. It doesn't change the fact that we pay 200% more taxes in the United States. It doesn't change the fact that we are twice as poor in Mississippi, the poorest state of the United States. It just changed the fact that every time we demanded for better rights and independence, they respond with massacres, death squads, torture, assassination, bombings, corruption, propaganda, lying, disappearance, brutality at all costs. It doesn't change the fact that if the women who were crossing the border in Mexico were in concentration camp and removed their uterus against their consent without them knowing, it doesn't change the fact that our social, economic, political system is rotten to its core.
The church, honestly, has left not addressing young men's problems. My issue with Jordan Peterson and his crowd is they try to seek secular solutions to what really is a spiritual problem. Historically,
You ever heard secular spirituality?
Social problems, like deeply rooted social problems, can only really be solved by the church. It's really important that the church is at
the church. Are we going to ignore anybody outside the church to contribute to society? Anybody? I'm not talking about atheists or anything. I'm talking about even Christians, like outside the church. You ever heard of liberation theology in Latin America?
the forefront of solving all of these problems because of how socially important the church has always been. The church is the bedrock of society. Back when everyone had communities, the center of community was the church. Like I said, it's an anomaly. It used to be an anomaly back when everyone went to church for people to be lonely the way a lot of modern men are very lonely. Revive the churches. And not just any churches. We need to revive the churches that are the centers of communities. Like your old historic mainline church at the center of most towns.
Why those churches in particular? Why can't it be the more ones that are truly dedicated to the community, like the Anabaptists or the Tosonian communities, or the early Hussite and the Taborites, or the liberation theology movements in Latin America, or the non-sectarian Hindu movements, or Pure Land Buddhism in its early years during the Maitreya cults, or during radical anarchist Zen Buddhists during World War II, oppressing against the majority of Zen Buddhists who were pro-fascist, or at the radical Jewish movements and of Jewish-speaking descent in early 20th century, or the Jewish resistance fighters in Poland, or at the radical Kashmirite Islam movements, or anything. It's really like, why have to be this specific church? There are many other churches can do better whatever you're going to describe, regardless of the theology they preach.
Oh, oops, okay. Those are the community centers. Those are the places we need to revive. It's very important that we do that. Now, the problem is a lot of men don't want to go to these places because these places aren't necessarily the most friendly environments for men, and that's understandable.
You just answered my question. Why don't they go there? Because it's an unfriendly environment. So yeah, of course they gotta leave. I don't want to stay in an area where I know it's going to be toxic. That's bad for that's bad for your health.
But it's not a masculine thing to do to simply complain about the way things are or to expect someone else.
Again, complain. Well, masculine. You ever heard so many tablet about the oldest complaint letter? About like they gave me the wrong cup or something. We've been complaining about shit since Mesopotamia.
Else to solve your problems for you. We could point fingers all day and talk about who's at fault for various environments not being very friendly to masculinity, but like I said, it's not a masculine or a manly.
I'm gonna put links in the description to show you the problems society has, the acid, marijuana, porn, and fucking Jordan Peterson of all people.
Thing to blame other people for your problems. Men don't seek out safe.
No, seriously, like when it comes to psychology, you choose Jordan Peterson or anybody else. What about psychoanalysis? Some people consider suicide. That's true only if we apply to Freudian psychoanalysis exclusively. Then yes, anything beyond that can be more of the proto-science category. So what about those psychoanalysis psychology like Eric Fromm, Wilmer Reich, Carl Jung, all these figures, so
spaces. Men conquer things. So a lot of men don't go to church because churches aren't the most masculine environments. Even if there's men running the church, the sermons are kind of soft, fluffy, and feminine. But that's not an excuse to not go to church. What that does mean is we need to get more involved in our churches, more involved in our communities, to make them more masculine and masculine-friendly environments. Like I said, if you're a man and you won't go to church because it's not a friendly place for you, that's not a masculine trait. It's not masculine to seek out a safe space, like I said. So if men are to change things, we need to get involved. Evil persists when good men do nothing.
This specific statement, evil persists when good men do nothing, that is technically true. For example, a poem, or not a poem, but more like a poetic way of expressing about this anonymous person said during World War II. When Hitler went, to summarize, basically goes like, when Hitler went and attacked the Jews, I didn't say anything. When he attacked the labor unions, I didn't say anything. When he attacked the other governing bodies, I didn't say anything. When he attacked the other non-Protestant movements, I didn't say anything. And he attacked the Freemason, I didn't say anything. The moment he attacked me, I couldn't find help with anybody because I let him take over everything.
Evil is allowed to fester, and evil really is festering in our society when men are passive, and that's why the powers that be want men to.
You mean more passive? You ever see the rise of extreme right-wing violence in the United States? The anti-LGBT laws they're establishing, the possibility of a trans genocide is going to implement by law. The continuation of colonialism in Puerto Rico, who recently they denied basic human rights like social services and social security. They denied that. We don't have that. you know, or what about the fascist state of Israel, who are killing and bombing innocent Palestinians who they deserve their independence? Or what about China, who are suppressing the independence movement in Hong Kong and may or may not invade Taiwan? Or what about Japan colonization of Okinawa, which the indigenous people Luchuans, which is the native people of Okinawa, are not considered real? In law, they do not exist. They are just a subset ethnic group of Japanese, and their Luchuan language is not Luchuan in Japanese law. It's a Japanese dialect. That is literally cultural extermination, removing their entire identity. What about the indigenous people of Puerto Rico? This is a term called paper genocide. When you read any literature about the Taino people, they say, oh, the Taino people are extinct. Well, Lucky and my grandpa are back to differ.
Be passive so much. That's why they're promoting MVP. That's why they're promoting marijuana, video games, and pornography. So we need to not be passive. If you're not involved in your local church, you need to get involved in your local church and get involved in your.
Why don't be a local church? Why can be other things like politics, environmental issues? Because I don't know if you ever watched the news. There are many people fighting for rights and improve their society. Maybe not in the United States in particular, but outside of that, there is a lot.
Community in other ways. But of course, we can't do it alone. Men often fly solo. Men are like.
What do you mean, man? We are a social species. We work cooperatively. We work in groups. That's how we survived the Stone Age. We didn't do like Rambo style, going, I am a lone wolf, you beta cuck. It's like, no, you work in group, because if you don't, you gotta die like a bitch. Have you ever read any anthropology work ever?
Like, sometimes I've said women are like dogs and men are like cats, because women tend to think in packs, tend to have like a pack mentality, and men tend to think solo.
Like I said earlier, we humans in general, you may be thinking in a very specific American culture, but this thinking you are right does not imply in other parts of the world, especially Latin America. It's very communal. Everybody works together. This idea of a man who thinks solo, goes solo, is foreign. For the Caribbean, that's a foreign concept. This is dumb American thinking. This Caucasian foolishness.
But the reason like women are often behind a lot of social justice movements is because women know how to create a mob, and men are often act individually, so they.
Bro, did you ever saw any revolution ever? Bro, you're a Christian. Have you ever heard of Martin Luther King Jr.? Like, seriously, bro. You ever heard of Martin Luther King Jr.? Luisa Capetillo? Leo Toisley? Malcolm X? Oh, for fuck's sake, like, seriously, bro.
They can't really band together. So it's important that you check in on your male friends. Check in to make sure they're okay. This is something that men aren't always the best at doing, and it's a good thing that men are good at controlling their emotions. I'm not saying men need to be more emotional, because, I'll often find feminists say, oh, men need to stop acting so masculine because that's what's hurting their mental health. No, what's hurting men is a society that's completely rigged against them. But like I said,
Again, I don't know your background, your social, political, economic background, but that sounds a privileged thing to say. Like, women are in an inferior position in all parts of society just because they were born with the wrong genitals. That's it. And if you want to be hardcore reductionist, like stupidly reductionist, when we start in sperm and the egg and we start developing in the embryo, we all start as female first, and then by biology throughout the process of the pregnancy change whether or not we stay as female or we turn man. So technically speaking, all men are trans women. That's why we still have nipples.
It's not our job to complain about the way things are. If men are really masculine, they can change it themselves. They don't need to stand around and demand someone else fix it for them. Like I said, that's not a masculine thing
Have you ever heard of cooperation and mutual aid?
to do. But it's still important that men talk to each other about their problems. If you have male friends, and I'm sure most of you do, you need to check in on them. Just see if they're doing okay, and even if they're not, make sure that you care. Make sure that they know you care about them. That'll mean a lot to them. Even just like a random guy friend. Right now, after this video, a random guy friend that you haven't talked to in a while, just text him and say, just how you doing? Just checking in on how you doing, bro. And there's nothing unmasculine about doing that, is there? No, of course not. Men need to care about each other.
Talking to people like that, it has nothing to do with masculinity and femininity. That is completely outside of whatever you think is attitude.
And that's why I love the Lord of the Rings so much. Tim Keller, God bless his soul, talks about this a lot. Of course, in the Lord of the Rings movies, there's,
Agree, the Lord of the Rings movies are great. I'll give him that credit. By the way, Tolkien was an anarchist.
romance and stuff. But the Lord of the Rings books talk about how the best love is sometimes not romantic love, it's friendship. Most of the characters in Lord of the Rings are men, and I think that's a good thing. Not because all stories need to have all male characters, but because it exemplifies the love of male friendships that often get ignored. There's something
I don't know. Seems pretty gay to me. Just kidding.
really great about men going on adventures together. That's why it's going to be an adventure to revive the local churches, and many friendships will be made along the way. And that's why the Boy Scouts were so important for generations of young men. It's literally
I think that's an American thing. Because I only saw that on television. It's not a thing here. To be honest, like, this is purely an American thing to my knowledge. Just like, Boy Scouts, Because, like, to my knowledge, why I see in American popular media, like, Boy Scouts is like, you go outside in the wilderness to camp and stuff. But here in the Caribbean, it's like, we already live with nature pretty much. I live in the mountains in the middle of fuck all, surrounded by trees, and there's like a cave over there. And for some reason, over down the mountain, there's like a monkey. I don't know where the hell that monkey even came from. It's not indigenous here. It's probably from the zoo, or illegally extorted and somehow escaped. It's a tailless brown monkey stealing all the mango.
literally young boys going on adventures in the wilderness and learning good values along the way. So of course the left had to target the Boy Scouts because they target everything that's culturally important. But I was a Boy Scout, I'm an Eagle Scout, I still think those principles need to be revived. Like, it used to be that men would rely on their wives for emotional support, but I already...
What about gay men? Or bi men, or trans men, or asexuals? Again, sex is not like the gender thing, like sexual, it's a social construct. It's not strictly in binary for any scientist will tell you this.
already explained why that's not happening today. So yeah, check in on your male friends. But also, men need to band together and start recreating these communities that have been lost. And these communities need to start in the church and then just spread out.
But what church? Because no Christian sects pre-Council of Nicaea, the first one, is survived with the exception of Mandeanism. So should we go back to the Mandean way of life of Christianity? Because it originated in the late 1st century, early 2nd century, making it the oldest existing church contemporary to the disciples and Jesus. Although they probably were dead when Mandeanism was formed, but you get my point.
Outward from there. The church, like I said, it's the bedrock of society. If we are to improve society, we need to start with the church.
Again, the least religious countries in the world are doing a happier, better lives than the most religious ones. So again, description, everything.
So band together with your male friends and start going back to church. Start reviving these old mainstream churches that have been dormant for so long. and then we can start rebuilding the fabric of society that has been destroyed by modernism. So
Destroyed by modernism. Bro, modernism died in like the 1950s. We're in the postmodernism, and now we're trying to transition away from postmodernism to postmodernism, which is not an official term, but that's like, you know, deal with it. That's a work in progress. It's the, so it's like, meta-modernism is like the most popular term right now, so there's that.
So the only hope for young men is to revive religious communities, which can only happen if men take leadership. I'm going to put maps in the description of this video for you to find churches if you don't know what church to go to, if you don't know a place to start. Start going
Well, this is not going to apply. I mean, I don't live in the country where he lives, so it's useless to me, the map.
Sunday and start making connections. Society is going to keep going in the direction.
And also, it's under the assumption you're a Christian. So if you're a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, an atheist, agnostic, or anything that isn't Christian, it's not gonna work for you.
That it's going in. Things are going to keep getting worse for men unless there is some drastic and dramatic change. Men need to stand up and revolt against the status quo. And we revolt by going back to church, by doing what they don't want us to do. They don't want us to form communities. They don't want us to band together, and they don't want us to have hope. They just want to keep us passive. And
They don't want to. It's like, learn your surroundings, bro. The things are bad because of the social, political, economic system, not because men are not men. And even then, what is considered manly has changed over time.
we can't do that. And we can't keep flying solo and numbing our senses, numbing our troubles with MVP. It's funny, I know of a lot of men who are conservative, in quotes, but they're not religious. For them, conservatism is just about what they're against. And trust me, there is a lot of stuff to be against. I know that wokeness and feminism and social justice is not a friendly environment for men. But conservatism never wins if it's only about what it's against. We need to be for something. And what I am for is creating these friendly religious communities where men can start families. And once men do take leadership in this,
Wait till he finds out Christian Anarchist exists.
women are going to see this, and women are going to get on board. If men are complaining about women...
Or better yet, the political party, the group that Karl Marx was in, where he wrote the Communist Manifesto, was founded by Christian communists. So there's that.
not having traditional values, men need to adopt some traditional values, and when they do, women will follow. And men becoming more traditional does help women as well. Even if they don't admit it, most women...
Be more sexist and foreign, where women should take any leadership or respect and should be property of men, or should be below men or submissive to men. Literally, the moment religion, especially when it become more institutionalized, women lost their autonomy. That is a common trend in every culture.
and want men who can lead a family for them, but feminism tells them otherwise, so...
Because for the most part, especially if you're indigenous in the Americas, patriarchy was a thing. It was matriarchy. Many indigenous cultures were matriarchy, and they were doing just fine. Example, my ancestors was a matriarchy, and they were living just fine because the Taino had a reputation for being peace-loving. Violence was practically unknown to us until Christopher Columbus came in and ruined everything, like he usually does. So it's like, the fuck are you talking about?
So they just go along with the crowd. But we don't need to listen to what they're saying. We just need to do it our own way. And then once they see that, they're going to follow. Again, it's not a masculine thing to demand other people change for you. You need to make the change, and then people are going to follow. So 3 things you should do right after watching this video: clean your room, text your friends, and go to church this Sunday.
I could do all that, and still doesn't change the fact that I'm a second-class citizen, who my island is a colony, who's been suctioned to imperialism and colonialism. We pay 200% more tax than the U.S., where 45% of the population is in poverty, we're in bankrupt, and we're constant threat of violence every day by the U.S. government, especially we support independence, because if I'm a little too vocal about independence, I can unironically be murdered by the state. by the sheer fact that I want my country to be independent. You know, Google the Ponce Massacre, Rio Piedra Massacre, Cerro Maravilla Massacre, Utuado Massacre, the bombing of Jayuya, the bombing of Utuado, the bombing of Vieques, the murder of Filiberto Ojeda Rios and Pedro Albizu Campos, the attempted assassination of Juan Marín Bra and the murder of his son, death squads, state-sponsored terrorism, human experimentation, eugenics, etc. Does it change the fact all those things happen? It doesn't matter how much I clean my room, how much I text my friends, how much I go to church. It doesn't change the fact that under US law, I have less rights. And if you want to take the laws literally, I'm not even human. Because according to the insular cases, because we're not white, we are incapable of the government. Or according to Dr. Colinius Holt, who did a eugenics program to exterminate the Puerto Rican people, we are, according to him, the most disgusting, foul peoples on the world, worse than the Italians. So I don't know what the fuck we did to even make the Italians look good, but there's that, And recently in U.S. court, not that long ago, I think it was last year, they just admitted it's a U.S. colony and we like to keep it that way. It belongs to us. And because of that, we're not going to have the same human rights. We're not going to have Social Security or other social program that every other U.S. citizen has. We don't have it. It doesn't change the fact that I'm not going to mention who, but a certain elderly lady was victim of human experimentation eugenics program to exterminate the quote-unquote population pool in Puerto Rico, where they eliminate her ability to reproduce against her consent. It was, Google la operación. It was a eugenics. It's basically genocide. In fact, the United Nations had to intervene to say to the U.S. If you keep doing that, we're going to label this as genocide, so they stop. Or it's death squad surveillance. Around 2 million Puerto Ricans had what is called the carpeta, which is FBI file to surveillance you to see whether or not you're considered a threat to the United States, which 9 times out of 10 was considered yes, you are a threat, just for the simple fact that you support independence. It doesn't matter if you're a conservative Christian. If you support independence, you are a threat, and if we feel like it, we're going to kill you in the name of freedom. And remember, the U.S. has a thing called taxation without representation, which is a thing that started the American Revolution, even though they're hypocrites because we also had taxation without representation, yet they don't give a shit. I can go on and on about the condition. No amount of cleaning of my room, no amount of texting to my friends will change the fact that according to U.S. law, I have less rights. By the pure fact that I was born on the wrong piece of land. I will have less opportunities because I was born with the wrong last name, with the wrong language, because I speak the wrong language, and because my skin color just so happened to be not the one they prefer, or there are so many things. The only thing can go right for me because I look white enough to pass off as white, my skin color, if they don't question too much, they will think I'm white a little bit, so I'll be alright, and because I'm a man, I will have the privileges pretty much by default, and I pretend to be Christian because you're not gonna have more opportunities if you're not a Christian in certain parts, so I had to lie to who I am. I had to lie that who I am, even though I am an indigenous Boricua, an atheist, an anarchist who support independence. I had to lie to my boss, lie to the government, lie to everything. That I'm a proud American white Christian man, straight as a rock. Well, I am straight, but you get my point. It doesn't change the fact I had to lie my background. I had to reject my indigeneity in order to survive. That happened to my family members. They get pulled over by the cops just because they look slightly different. My family member almost got arrested because our neighbor called in America because we were speaking our native language. And somehow that scared her. It doesn't change the fact that, you know, I'm a victim of imperialism, colonialism every day. It doesn't change the fact that no matter how hard I work, how hard I tried, I am not considered human by some Americans. No matter how hard I try, I will not have the same right as the rest of the United States. No matter how hard I try, I will consider as the foreigner, the outsider. I had to be the US president like Obama in order to change their minds. And even that, I'm not gonna convince anybody. Read the description to see understand what the fuck how the world actually functions.